Let's Take This Outside with Marianne Iveson, the podcast where she speaks to athletes, outdoor professionals, and scientists about why they connect with nature.
Dan Rubinstein is an Ottawa-based writer, editor, and stand-up paddleboarder. His first book, Borne to Walk, was a finalist for the Ottawa Book Awards and Kobo Emerging Writer Prize. He's also a National Magazine award-winning journalist who contributes to publications such as The Walrus, The Globe and Mail, and En Route, and he's a former editor at Canadian Geographic magazine. Today we're talking about his latest book that came out this past summer, Waterborne, a 1,200-mile paddleboarding pilgrimage. I am excited to dive in. Please welcome Dan Rubinstein. Dan, welcome to Let's Take This Outside. Thank you so much for joining me. I feel like this is like a perfect fit for Let's Take This Outside.
Yeah, good morning, Marianne. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm glad I'm able to be outside for this.
First of all, you're in Ottawa, but you're like in the Alta Vista area, but you're in your backyard right now.
Yeah, I'm in my backyard. It's actually a sort of a semi-suburban neighborhood. I like to call Alta Vista the highlands of Ottawa because we're the Alta Vista. And it's quiet. There's birds, there's trees, and thankfully nobody's cutting their lawn at this point. So we should be good.
You would be surprised at how many guests do this outside. It's actually kind of perfect usually if there's like birds and wind and random stuff. It adds to, if I could, I would do every episode outside, but it's not realistic in today. But I'm realizing, but like in our preamble, that like we have a lot in common and we kind of know some of the same people. But you worked at Canadian Geographic, which is crazy. I've interviewed so many people from Canadian Geographic and the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, but you knew one of my former guests, David McGuffin.
Yeah, David and I went to journalism school together in Halifax about 30 years ago, which makes me feel really old. And we reconnected when he moved back to the Ottawa area a few years ago. Don't know him through Canadian Geographic, just know him through other circles. But I think I'll be a guest on his podcast, and I've been back in the magazine talking about some of my paddling exploits. So it's a good relationship to have. Yeah,
I'm very jealous because he lives right on Meech Lake.
I think
which
that would be too distracting for me. I think I would be out paddling and swimming and sitting on the dock all day and wouldn't be able to get any work done. I have a hard enough time already staying inside and working. So, and where I'm talking to you now is actually kind of my summer office. I'm lucky enough to have a pergola on my back deck with the really lush grapevine over top of it. So even if it's raining lightly, it's sheltered under here. And even if it's really hot and sunny, it's shaded and cool. And it's just a privilege and a blessing to be able to sit out here if I have to be doing computer stuff on a nice day or a not so nice day.
Yeah, that's so nice. Did you grow up in Ottawa? Are you from Ottawa?
Born and raised in Toronto. I think like many of your guests in the mega city, not necessarily in a wild place. But I haven't lived in Toronto for nearly 30 years, and I've lived and worked across Canada from Halifax to Fredericton, Moncton. Spent 10 years in Edmonton, Alberta, before moving to Ottawa. So I know a lot about this country, and I've lived in a lot of different regions, and I think that's been really helpful in my career in journalism to know parts of Canada intimately, to be able to report on or commission magazine stories from other writers on these parts of the country, rather than just kind of parachuting into a place for a few days. To know what the West and the East and the middle of the country are like has been really helpful.
As someone who also, like, I moved to Ottawa, I'm from Southern Ontario, near like Windsor area. And I moved to Ottawa like maybe 10 years ago, fell in love. I'm a big outdoors lover, that grew as I, have been here. Can I ask why Ottawa is your home now?
It was work. It was a job as an editor at Canadian Geographic that brought me here, that brought my wife, Lisa, and I here. We had young kids at the time when we moved here in 2008, and my family's still in Toronto. She's from New Brunswick and has lots of people back east, so it was closer to our family. So it was work and family, but really I fell in love with the outdoors in this part of the country. And I mean, the rivers, the Ottawa and the Rideau rivers, the canal are great for paddling on, swimming in, running and biking along. And I was already a pretty big cross-country skier after 10 years in Alberta. But the cross-country skiing in Ottawa is world-class.
World-class, it is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can be with no traffic at a trailhead in Gatineau Park in 20 minutes. And I don't know if there's many other cities in the world where you can be skiing through rock cuts, in the wilderness, half an hour after leaving your house. And not only Gatineau Park, but the urban trails we have in the city now too, that really kind of mushroom during COVID. it a 7-minute drive be on a greenbelt trail, 5-minute drive I can be skiing on groomed trails along the Rideau River, and these are like volunteer community trail networks. So I don't know what I do without 3 or 4 months of cross country skiing every winter. I don't think I'd be a very happy person.
I've talked about my love for cross-country skiing a million times on this podcast. I didn't do it till I moved here. Like, I was never on skis. Like, there's not enough snow in Southern Ontario, as you would know, to kind of do that. So I fell in love with cross-country skiing, and it totally helped with seasonal depression. Like, it totally, like, take the fact that you can go outside and, like, be warm enough to be outside for, like, a couple hours. And, cross-country skiing is one of my favorite new outdoor sports because of the accessibility that we have here.
Yeah, and I think, like, I tell people that, when I'm in the zone and I'm wearing just, a light wicking layer and a t-shirt over top of it, and I'm out for 6 hours at -20, I tell people it feels like a summer day. Like, you're such balance with the weather that you don't feel cold. As long as you have the right gear, you're moving at the right pace, the right hydration and nutrition, you just total sabbatical with the environment. And I think being able to do that here in the wintertime, and it's privileged to have the time and the means to do so. I totally acknowledge that. But doing that in the winter, and also as a paddler, and similarly having the gear, whether it's paddle boards, dry suits, wetsuits, to be out in the rivers from late March onward, from as soon as the ice breaks up, because you're outdoors, really kind of getting the most out of all of these seasons. When people complain about the weather, oh, it's been cold, it's been wet, I don't really feel that because I'm outside anyway. And there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing, right? If you have the gear to be outside, then you can enjoy every day, no matter how cold, wet, windy, rainy, etc. it is. As
someone who runs hot, I completely agree with you. Although I do have my limits on open water swimming, even with a wetsuit on. I think I went last fall. I think maybe in October I tried in Meech Lake. It was not a good. I do have my limits.
Yeah.
Certain temperatures.
Everybody has limits. So I was mentioning in our preamble that my favorite thing to do in town is river surfing. So we get these standing waves in the Ottawa River. They're best in the spring when the water's at a certain level, during and after the freshet. And I was out this season in late March when there were still chunks of ice coming down the river, and there's kayakers, there's surfers, and there's paddle surfers like me, and you're in a dry suit and you're fine when you're on the water. It's only when you're changing in the parking lot afterwards that you're cold and you're chipping ice off the zippers and trying to get back into your car. But being out in the river in late March, it's kind of all right. It's water season already, when there's still snow on the ground and people are still kind of hunkered down inside. You're out literally in the water, and it's I can't describe how amazing it is.
The fact that I haven't even asked you one of my questions on my list yet shows how much we just love this city and love where we live in the outdoors. But we are here to talk about Borne, a 1,200-mile paddleboarding pilgrimage, which is this amazing book where you talk about, like, your love of the outdoors. And I was like, yes, I need to talk, like, your, is it your publicist who told me, Claire?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. She sent me what the book was about. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. You're talking about nature, you're talking about water. I was like, I have to talk to you. But can you tell me where your love of, like, obviously you're obsessed with it, but what point were you, like, obsessed with water and the outdoors? Like, where did that begin for you if you grew up in Toronto?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of your guests who in episodes that I've listened to, it starts with parents and family and upbringing. My parents were immigrants to Canada. We camped and hiked a lot as a kid. And that was kind of where the seed was planted, trips to Algonquin Park or day trips to the Bruce Trail from Toronto. I got away from that as a teenager. I was more into team sports, playing basketball and baseball and things like that. And, wasn't really into camping or hiking or cycling. But then in my early 20s, when I was living in New Brunswick and working as a reporter, those kind of seeds started to really blossom. And when I started dating my current my not current wife, my wife, Lisa.
Your wife, yeah.
Our only wife, Lisa.
Yeah.
We were living in New Brunswick, and we started to go camping in the Bay of Fundy and different parts of the coastline. We started to hike different trails, and things started to kind of boom from there. We moved to Edmonton, Alberta in '98, and we were a 3.5 hour drive from Jasper in the Rockies, and that was our weekends, right? We camped there, not so much in the summer when it got really busy, but in the shoulder seasons, in April and May and June, and then September, October, we would be out there many weekends camping, hiking, cross-country skiing, which I did with my parents as a kid, came back into my life when I lived in Alberta. And just the more I did it, the more things kind of snowballed. And I gained knowledge and proficiency and was able to go further and longer in mountains and things like that. So that was really the start of it. Water, though, only came into my life and became an obsession about 10 years ago. So hiking was my big thing, I would say. And I wrote a book called Borne to Walk, which came out in 2015 about the transformative properties of walking, and traveled around Canada, the US, and the UK to spend time with people whose lives or work embodied some of these properties of walking. So that book came out, and we had seen people stand up paddleboarding in and around Ottawa and kind of made fun of them because it looks kind of ridiculous. And I wanted to try it. So I rented a sup at a provincial park, at Borne Provincial Park, on a family camping trip one nice summer afternoon, and immediately fell in love with it. And I just loved the access to water that it gave you. You could jump in and swim. You could see down into the lake. You could move around and just kind of work different muscles. And, I think that from the first time I was on a sup, I fell in love with it. And even though I've lived, as I mentioned, in cities across Canada, all of which are on either rivers, Lake Ontario, or an ocean, I had never owned a watercraft of any kind. And I got a paddleboard, and suddenly I could get on the water anywhere and everywhere. And that's when this obsession with water, with blue space, with paddling really took root.
Can you tell me about the moment when you're talking to your wife, Lisa, and say, hey, Lisa, I want to paddleboard to New York. It's going to take me a couple months. What do you think? That led to this book. Like, do you remember that moment or when you were talking about it?
Yeah, I remember it vividly. And she immediately said, go for it. Like, no hesitation, which is really, really wonderful. I mean, part of it, I think, was I was, at a point in my life where I was complaining about a lot of things, and complaining about my job, complaining about the state of the world, worried about the future, worried about our children, just kind of midlife crisis, middle age, anxiety swelling up. And we've been together for more than 20 years. Lisa knows me extremely well. I was kind of, when I was developing this project and planning a trip, she was part of those conversations. But when I talked to 3 people. I talked to a paddler friend in Ottawa, a really accomplished canoeer named Max Finkelstein, who goes for crazy long distance trips and had paddled a lot of the route. And he said, yeah, your route is feasible. And then I talked to a writer friend out west, Kevin Patterson, who's a sailor, a doctor, a novelist. And he said, yeah, this has literary merit. I think people will read it. And then I continued my triangulation and talked to a writer paddler friend, an adventure writer, also in BC, named Bruce Kirkby. And Bruce is also an obsessive paddleboarder. And Bruce said, not only yet, I think your route is feasible. I think your book is feasible, but he helped me hone in on gear and things I would need for the trip. So once I kind of had those pieces lined up, that's when I said to Lisa, I think this could work. What do you think? And she said, go for it. And I think she just didn't want to hear me complain about my life anymore. You could go for it, get it out of your system.
Whatever midlife crisis this is, go take care.
Knowing that for the 4 months I was away, she would be kind of solo and shouldering the domestic load. But beyond that, knowing that in the year and a half subsequent to that I'd be working on a book. And for my first book, she remembered how encompassing a project like that is, and how all the rosies bubble up, and how complaints bubble up as well. So even when I got home, I was still kind of on the trip and still really focused on this project. So she knew she was, there was a chunk of time where I would be completely distracted by other things, but she said, go for it. And I think throughout our lives together, and throughout our lives as parents together, we have twin daughters who are 20. We've taken turns spelling each other for personal projects, for trips, for things. She hasn't done anything quite this extreme and time consuming, but I guess she's got next. So
what's her thing? What is she like?
Lisa's a writer as well. She's an amazing writer. She's a better writer than I am. She mostly writes nonfiction. She's won a couple of National Magazine Awards for her work. She's done some fiction as well. She's doing a personal project now, and heading away to do some writing in a couple of weeks. And her name is Lisa Gregoire. If I can give her a plug.
Yes, please give her a bump. Maybe I should talk to her. She sounds cooler
and a much
than you,
better
actually.
Writer. I might be a better editor, but she's a better writer, and she's better at being edited than I am when we work on each other's stuff. So,
that's such a great team. I love this so much for you. Did you talk to Adam Schultz? Do you know Adam Schultz at all?
I actually hired Adam at Canadian Geographic as an intern when I worked there. And yeah, so we worked together. This was a long time ago. I have not been in touch with him, but I certainly know his work well.
Well, I know that he paddled a lot of the similar routes that you did, right, through this book. So
yeah, when he came up to the Arctic from his home, he lives on Lake Erie, right?
Yeah, and paddled up that way. So I'm assuming there's some crossover in the route, but that's so funny.
Recall reading about him coming up around Niagara Falls, and that's part of the fun in the route that I chose. It's not a wilderness expedition. I wasn't going to a remote place. I was going to Albany, New York, and Utica, New York, and kind of upstate America, and Toronto and Smiths Falls, and these kind of urban and industrial places. So it wasn't a wilderness trip, but I love being out in nature and at the interface of where natural systems kind of engage with more urban or semi-urban areas. And I think also, like, as a journalist, I need people to talk to. So if I had gone on a wilderness trip and it was just me and my paddleboard for a couple months, it would not have been nearly as engaging a book. But because I was traveling through one of the most populated parts of the continent, there were people everywhere. And meetings I had set up in advance with folks whose lives or work engage with water in one way or another, but just strangers. And that was by far the most interesting and rewarding part of the trip, just meeting so many amazing people.
How did you pick this route? Was it on purpose to go to it sounds like it was on purpose to go to these really highly populated areas.
Yeah, well, I love the idea of exploring the nature in my own backyard. I've paddled a fair bit on the Ottawa River from home, and typically I'll just put in downtown Ottawa and head east, head downstream, and either get a ride home at the end of the day, or if I go on an inflatable, catch a bus home. So I do these kind of solo shuttles where I'll go Petrie Island in the east end of Ottawa. It's kind of the last place where you can catch OC Transpo, catch a bus home. So I've done that a bunch of times, and I've always wanted to just keep going. I know lots of people who've paddled from here to Montreal, so that was a natural destination. I know a few folks who've paddleboarded from here to New York City, so that was also sort of, that's always in your mind, right? But the kind of layer over top of my route is that when my mother's family emigrated from Eastern Europe to North America, they took a boat from Poland to Montreal. Relatives who had preceded them to the New World were living in New York City, came up and met them in port and brought them down to New York, which is where my mom met my father, who was a grad student from South America. And then when they got married and wanted to start having kids, it was the late 60s. The US was a pretty tumultuous place then, as it is now. And they decided to move to much quieter and more peaceful Canada, and they ended up settling in Toronto, which is where I was born and raised. So connecting Ottawa, where I live now, with Montreal, New York, and Toronto maps onto my family stops in North America. So I really like that layer. So it was not only the nature in my own backyard, but part of the world, which is kind of my family's story, is all wrapped up in.
Oh, I love the layers of this. This is great. I have a weird logistic question. How do you cross over to the States on water?
Good question. Yeah. So
just a random logistic question.
It was 2023 when I did the trip, and in our modern era, there's an app for everything. So U.S. Customs and Border Patrol has an app where you can preload your passport information and all your details. I had to pick a name for my vessel and provide, the length of my vessel and things like that.
What was the name?
I didn't really have a name. I think I went with Badfish, which is the name of the company in Colorado that gave me my board,
Cool.
gave me my paddleboard. Shout out to Badfish. They're amazing. Bruce Kirkby, the adventure writer I talked to when we were talking about paddleboards, he said, this is the board you need. Their 14-foot touring inflatable is the perfect paddleboard for your trip. And it was. So I did all that. And what you do is when you're approaching the border, you activate the app and you kind of queue up a video call with a Customs and Border official. It was raining the day I was traveling down the Richelieu River across the border into New York State. So I was under a bridge trying to do this video call. Foolishly, I picked a train bridge. So they were slats, not a roof. And so the rain was dripping on me while I was making this call. And they're not in video, just you. So he's seeing this guy on a paddleboard in the rain who says, I want to come into your country. But they let me through. But the Customs and Border official on the phone said that they might want to talk to you at the customs dock in Rouse's Point, New York. And I was like, okay. I thought I was cleared for access, but I was like, whatever, if they want to talk to me, they want to talk to me. And then a few minutes later, I'm paddling down the middle of the river, and I see over on my right a dock, and I see people in what looks like uniforms. And I'm like, okay, that's the border. And then I hear them yelling at me, "Hey, you!" So I figured, okay, they I guess they want to talk to me.
Yeah.
Slowly paddled over, and I assumed that with the app, there would be some type of notification that there's some idiot on a paddleboard, he's coming in.
Right.
But they were like, "Where are you going? Who are you?" And so there was no kind of relationship between the app and the people who were on the water monitoring the border. But once they knew that I had done the app, they checked my passport, and I was good to go. It was actually easier in that sense to enter the States on a paddleboard than to come back to Canada. When I came back to Canada months later on the Niagara River, just above the falls, supposed to get to land and then self-report. So I pulled onto the Welland River and stopped at a dock and called Canada Customs. And the officer I spoke with seemed totally puzzled and confused about why was I calling and where was I? And, I could have just kind of come back home and not told anybody. I don't think they were watching me. I think it would have been fine. But after a long time, she asked me a million questions. And then she finally asked for my passport number. I was like, wouldn't you want that first to know who you're talking to? But it all got sorted out. And I was legally allowed to re-enter Canada.
Can I ask, like, kind of going back a little bit, like, how did you prepare for this trip, like, both logistically and emotionally, like, being away from it sounds like that's the longest you've been away from your family.
Yeah. I mean, logistically, trying to be really logical and systematic. So, again, talking to Bruce Kirkby about just really geeking out on gear was great. Like even specific dry bags to use. And, I was really fortunate to, through some of my paddler friends and contacts, to hook up with people in the industry. Blackfish, which is an amazing paddle company, gave me a couple of just really great 3-piece paddles that I could break down. Mustang Survival gave me a dry bag. Mountain Equipment Company gave me a whole bunch of great lightweight camping gear. So I was able to, to give myself as best a chance as possible of doing this trip. I wanted to make sure that I had the right gear. So I was able to kind of assemble that. Physically, I'm quite active. I didn't really engage in a formal training mechanism. I just kind of upped up my game over the winter. So a lot of skiing, a lot of time in the gym, a lot of running, a lot of stretching. Then once the ice melted, my trip began in June. So once the ice melted in April, I think that year, I got out paddling a bunch of times and paddled with my full kit a bunch of times. And mostly I just wanted to see if I could make it, portage from one place to another with all of my crap. So I remember the first time I did everything, I had everything, and I had like dry bags full of cans to approximate the weight I would be carrying because I didn't have all my gear yet. I walked from home to a bus stop, took a bus to the Rideau River, paddled the length of the Rideau to the Ottawa River, portaged about 1.5 kilometers to get down to the Ottawa, and then paddled another 25 or so K to Petrie Island, and then took like 2 buses and the LRT train to get home. So it was a long, tiring day with the 14-foot paddleboard and then on my back on the bus and 3 dry bags, but I was able to get from point to point, whether on the water or off the water. So I said, okay, this is doable. Emotionally, I don't know if it was that challenging. Again, my children are older, so there wasn't that degree of hands-on parenting that I would be interesting. And with the phone and with connectivity throughout my route, I wasn't in the wilderness, so I could talk and message and be in touch with people a lot. So yeah, I kind of cleared the decks as much as I could, told everybody who might need me that I'd be away for, a few months. I did the first leg, Ottawa to Montreal, over the course of about a week, and then came home for a few days to get ready for the longer Montreal to New York to Toronto leg. So I kind of did the first week as a proving ground. Can I do the journalism? Can I do the paddling? Can I camp at night and then work the next day? And it worked out really well. So once I did that, I was kind of all systems go for the rest of the trip.
Let's Take This Outside with Marianne Iveson. Let's Take This Outside now has a newsletter. Keep up to date with outdoor news, events, and great discount codes and deals from our partners. Sign up today at letstakethisoutside.ca.
Was there anything in your gear that was maybe a little bit just more for comfort that wasn't necessary? And was there anything in your gear that like saved your butt that you weren't expecting, wasn't expecting to save your butt?
That's a really good question. I thought I'd be reading a lot in my tent at night before falling asleep. So I brought like a big hardcover heavy novel, and I would read like the same paragraph every night and fall asleep, and ended up just abandoning it somewhere along the way because like I just don't have the brain, the waves, or the energy to read. I was tired at night. I mean, I'm not an overly techie person, but I had a battery pack for my phone, and in places where there was no power, it was not only a way to stay in touch with family, but it was the logistics of journalism. I was setting up interviews and meetings with people along the route. So being able to be in contact with people was pretty crucial. I had given a lot of folks kind of a bit of a window. I'm going to be
right
on your part of the Hudson River in these 2 days. Are you around? And if they said yes, then as I drew closer, it would be, okay, how about this day? All right, how about this afternoon? All right, I'll see you at this time and there. So I had to stay in touch with a lot of people along the way. So again, not a techie person, not a phone person, but that proved pretty indispensable. And then on the nutritional side of things, one of the companies that I didn't mention, Hammer Nutrition, gave me a bunch of stuff, and some of their energy bars and electrolyte tabs were just really helpful because although I was traveling through a lot of towns and able to restock food, it was so hot and humid that summer that even things I would normally have while camping that don't require nutrition, dry sausage, hard cheese, things like that, would just melt or go rancid in my dry bag. It was so hot. Just having the energy bars and the electrolytes to keep consuming calories, energy shakes as well, that really helped me out.
Very specific question. Do you know how much weight you lost? If it was super humid and you're probably losing a bunch of water and salt. And
at one point in Troy, New York, I had to go buy a belt because my shorts were no longer fitting. And I was just hungry all the time. I remember one night on the Erie Canal in a town, going to a Mexican restaurant for dinner and like eating a giant meal. And then all the appetizers they bring to the table for a full family, I ate all of those. And then I went to a gas station across the street and got a couple of ice cream sandwiches afterwards. And I was still hungry. And I'm not a big guy, but I was just eating anything and everything. And I was still hungry a lot of the time.
Was there any point on your journey where like you felt unsafe because of conditions and you wanted to turn around? Was there any like really crazy moments like that?
The roughest weather sort of water conditions I experienced, and these are the roughest paddling conditions I've ever experienced, despite spending a fair bit of time on the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans on a paddleboard, was on Lake Ontario. So I was in St. Catharines, and I was going to paddle to Burlington, Ontario at the tip of the lake, and then Toronto the next day. You could see Toronto across the lake from St. Catharines. And when I set out from the beach, it was calm and sunny and a nice day. And I could see the CN Tower in the distance and thought, maybe I'll just cut straight across.
Oh, no.
But I know you really need the right weather window for that. And boat support is pretty helpful when you're crossing Lake Ontario. So it's like, no, I'm not an idiot, that much of an idiot. I'm going to stick with following the shoreline to Burlington and then to Toronto the next day. And the forecast called for a fairly tame wind from the east. So I thought, great, it'll give me a little push to Burlington. But the wind grew and grew and grew. And because it was coming from the east, it had all of the length of Lake Ontario for waves to build upon, all of that fetch. So by early afternoon, the waves were like 4 or 5 feet. And when you're on a paddleboard, your body kind of acts like a sail. So it's pushing you, but you control your direction by switching sides as you're paddling on. So I was paddling solely on my left side because the waves were hitting me from the right. And I had not fallen in on the trip yet, and started to fall in a few times, even when I was kneeling on the board. If the wave hit you at the wrong spot, you went in. And what I did not expect or practice kind of dealing with was at one point my board flipped over, and I was in the water. Water wasn't warm. Water wasn't cold. I was wearing my PFD. I was leashed to the board, so it wasn't a real danger. But I remember kind of falling in and thinking, oh, no, what do I do now? And all my stuff's in dry bags. Dry bags are under tie-down straps and clipped to the board, so they're not floating away. Like, how do I deal with this? And I was able to just really simply right the board and shove the dry bags back in position. So I was like, okay, that worked. Had that maneuver been tricky or challenging, I think I would have had to call it and just head to shore and figure out what to do from there. But because, okay, if the worst case scenario is I fall in and the board flips over and I know what to do, then I'll be fine. But that was a really, really, really draining day. I ended up stopping a bit short of Burlington in Hamilton, and kind of just my brain wasn't really working after 8 hours on the water, and there was a beach, and I thought I'll just kind of surf into the beach, take a break, and then do the last few kilometers to get to, there's a sheltered harbor in Burlington. There's a break and the kind of sandbar at that end of the lake, and you can get through the channel and into the harbor. And I was aiming for a marina near where a friend of mine lives. And I thought, okay, I'll just take a break at Hamilton Beach and then do the last bit. But after surf crashing into the shore and wiping out, grabbing my bags and board and getting them off the water, I realized just the waves were just pounding the beach, and there would be no way to get back out. So I was like, okay, I guess that's the end of today's paddle.
I love the learning on the go too. You're like, oh, I guess this does work or this doesn't work. Was there a specific body of water or maybe a beach or something that was like stunned you with its beauty?
Yeah, I mean, I was really, for some reason, amongst the most, I mean, the whole trip was just magical, wonderful, mind-blowing. Everywhere I was, every day was, kind of a whole universe unfolded of challenges and beauty and just amazing human interaction. But some of the parts of it that stand out most were on the Erie Canal. So the Erie Canal is like 363 miles long. It's like 580 and change kilometers. It flows from the Hudson River to Buffalo and Lake Erie. It actually turns 200 years old this year. It was opened 1825, and it was built for industry. It was built to open up the Great Lakes and the interior of the U.S. to the eastern seaboard for shipping and settlement and colonization, and led to the displacement of indigenous peoples and all sorts of terrible things, but lots of good things as well. Recently, it's become more of a recreational waterway, and it flows through some kind of Rust Belt cities, but also some beautiful natural places. And I was just struck by how beautiful it was. I mean, I really didn't know much about the Erie Canal before I set out. I think a lot of us in Canada don't even know that it remains a navigable route, that you can paddle the whole length of it. There's dozens of locks, but you can paddle the whole length of it. And there were just some parts of it that were just magically beautiful. There were misty mornings at various random places where I was camping, where, it's just a real delight to be able to be there. There were sunsets where the light was just so soft and wonderful. But just kind of circling back to something we touched on earlier, and what ended up being the main theme of the book, it's the people I met on the Erie Canal were amongst the most kind and generous and welcoming people I've ever met anywhere. And these are strangers who see a weird guy on a weird thing doing a weird trip, just so curious and supportive and joyful and proud of where they live. And you asked about safety and danger. Literally the only time I wasn't sure about camping in a specific place, it was in a town on the Erie Canal that's a little rougher on the edges. And as a paddler, you're allowed to camp at kind of the boat landings in these communities on the canal. Typically, people will tie up their motorboats and sleep there. But if you're paddling or cycling along the length of the canal, you're able to stay there. So I actually had to go to the police station to get a key to the bathroom, and was sitting there with my dry bags and board and just looking around this park and just feeling that it wasn't necessarily a place where I could leave my gear unattended. And I was wondering if I'm trying to sleep here and there's people around, will I feel safe? But a couple I had met earlier that day on the waterway lived in that town. And when I was chatting with them a few hours earlier, they had said, well, when you get to our town, we're going to come meet you and we'll bring you some food and we'll hang out. Great. It'd be nice to socialize with people. And I was talking to them. They brought some beer and some homemade cookies and some nuts and fruit, and we're just hanging out. And I asked them, is it safe to camp here? And they said, I don't know. Do you feel safe? And I said, I don't know. And I realized at that moment that they were not only kind of welcoming me, I think they came to look out for me. I think they knew their town was a bit rough around the edge. And Sue ended up phoning her brother, who lived right across the water, and he let me camp in his backyard for the night. So, the one time where maybe something bad would have happened while camping ended up being just this amazing moment of human connection with strangers who just wanted to sort of share their part of the world with me.
I love that story, but I was actually going to ask you, between all the people that you met, was there, on purpose, like these things that you've scheduled or just random encounters, was there any particular conversations or insight that really stuck with you or will stick with you forever?
Yeah. So at the end of my first leg, I spent a couple nights in Ganawage, which is the Mohawk community on the south side of the St. Lawrence River across from Montreal. And I spent time with a few folks there. But one was a young woman named Maris Jacobs. Maris is a coach at the paddling club there. She used to be a high-level elite competitive kayaker herself, and now coaches. And she talked to me about how, as a young woman, as a kid, learning the sport, paddling, being on the water by herself, learning about balance, both in a literal sense and a more of a metaphorical sense, helped her gain confidence and helped her kind of feel, start to understand who she was. And now, as a coach, working with youth who paddle at the club, and this is a community with a long and rich history of paddling. There's a guy named Alan Morris who won an Olympic medal as a canoer who comes from Ganawage. These are some high-level paddlers. But Maris was talking about just teaching kids good values and teaching kids how to become good community members. I also spent some time in Ganawage with a guy named Cole DeLille, who works for the local environmental office. And the St. Lawrence Seaway, when it was built in the 1950s, the big shipping route along the St. Lawrence, was basically bulldozed through Ganawage's front yard. So paddlers have limited access to the water because there's a giant shipping route through there. And one of the things that happened when the Seaway was built was they took a whole bunch of rock and debris, and there was a small series of islands off the coast of the community, and they just dumped all the rock and debris there, and they made this one big island. And since the 1950s, it's been this really kind of arid, not very pleasant place, overgrown with invasive species. So Cole, working with the local environmental office, has been part of a project to renaturalize the island. And they've created habitat there for local flora and fauna. They've created a bike trail, beach, benches for people to sit and hang out. And in both Maris's and Cole's story, I'm seeing a place, an indigenous community that has a long and rich traditional connection to the water that's been impeded by this industrial colonial thing. Yet they're still working to get it back, and they still feel this really strong connection. And that really spoke to me about the potential of water and blue space to support this kind of rebirth, and really set the tone for a lot of the rest of my trip. Seeing that even in a place that has been so damaged by industry, that's been so disconnected from the river that is the reason it's there, even in that place, they're fighting and maintaining this connection because they understand its primacy, its value. That stood out to me in a really deep and profound way.
Can you tell me about the concept of blue space?
Yeah, so I'm surprised, in conversations I've been having that not everybody knows it. Even people who work, in kind of environmental adjacent fields don't always know the term. It's essentially the aquatic equivalent of green space. So, it's hard to differentiate the two. Without blue, without water, there's no green because everything needs it. All plants and animals, including human beings, need water to live. But there's been increasing research in recent years on what happens when people spend time in, on, or around water. And that can mean anything from, a park on a river to a fountain in a city to, remote coastline. And the research, a lot of it explores psychological health as well as physiological health. And some of the kind of the data, the numbers coming back, and these are environmental psychologists and other, academics are seeing that, we're basically happier and healthier when we're around water. It tends to, kind of boil down. It makes us more active and less anxious. We lose track of time when we're around water. And if, you're going for a run in the city, you might run for this number of minutes. If you're going for a run along the river, you might run a little bit longer. And every extra minute of movement is good for our bodies. Psychologically, being around water, there's a woman named Jenny Rowe at the University of Virginia. She's an environmental psychologist. I remember talking to her years ago. And she said that when you're around water, some of the things it does, it gives you kind of a feeling of extent, of boundless possibilities. So you kind of see potential for all sort of creative directions. But at the same time, it also gives you a feeling of comfort and belonging. And I think kind of evolutionarily, in a really elemental way. We are mostly water. Our planet is mostly water. Our communities are where they are because of water. So when we're around water, we feel this kind of ancient bond, something magical about it, draws us to it. So water makes us feel good, but it does other things too. Like it also, one of the terms that a researcher in the UK, a researcher from the UK named Matt White, who's now at the University of Vienna, says it encourages intergenerational play. So you picture kind of the grandparent who's on their knees at the beach building sandcastles with their grandchildren. They might be doing the same thing in the urban backyard or at a playground, but when they're around water, something about that environment encourages people to spend time with one another. It also, there's some really recent and really, I think, important peer-reviewed data saying that water, more so than other natural environments, encourages pro-environmental behavior. So it encourages us to take better care of the planet, especially amongst children. So if you take your kid out to the river every day and they see somebody throwing plastic water bottles in the garbage, they might say, no, don't do that. That should be recycled. And something about being around water and their connection to and love for that environment makes them want to take better care of the planet. So it does all of these things. And then my kind of theory layered on top of that is that because water makes us feel good, because there's this latent elemental danger around water, it can be a dangerous environment. And because water slows us down, because we tend to kind of step off the gas a little bit and be more reflective, water also facilitates connection between strangers. And I think, when I think about the biggest challenges and crises facing our world these days, climate change is at the top of my list. Health crisis, physical and mental health is at the top of my list as well. But I think polarization and disconnect between people, and the fact that a lot of our interactions are mediated by technology and not in the real world. I think water has the capacity to help address all of these things. It's not a panacea, and it is a double-edged sword. Drowning is one of the leading causes of unintentional injury, death around the world. Flooding, waterborne diseases are some of the most impactful intense storms, impactful consequences of climate change, and they tend to impact people with the least capacity to escape or adapt. So water, it's not always a positive place, but even in places where water is risky and dangerous, even in marginalized communities, there still is this connection. There still is this potential.
Would you ever do something like, hearing you talk about it in the experience and the human connection and talking about blue space, like, would you ever want to do something like this again? You also have Borne to Walk, your other book. Are you thinking about, okay, what's next? What's something else that I can do to connect people to our Earth?
Yeah, I mean, Borne to Walk came out in 2015, Waterborne now in 2025. So
Is Air next?
Yeah, a friend suggested Airborne as the as the next as the next part of the trilogy. I had as a working title Born to Fly. Yep. / Born to Die, because I'll be in my 60s at that point and looking at the finish line, at some point. But if I maintain the current pace, I've got a few years to figure out what's next. And as much as I love the journalism, the research, talking to people, and the activity of projects like this, writing is hard. Writing is challenging. Writing is every day is, it's kind of like a paddling trip like this, where every day is a struggle. Every day there are challenges and obstacles and hurdles. Every day you don't know if you're going to make it to the finish line. So every day when I'm working on a major writing project, every day I want to quit and stop and I wonder why I'm doing it. But then you just put in the time and you get there. So maybe something flying, but I think I've got a few years to figure out what's next.
Do you have any adventure plans, solo or with your wife Lisa or your family? Is any kind of trips planned or anything?
Nothing huge in the works. We tend to do a lot of camping in the summertime. I mean, we did a trip to New Hampshire last fall, which was magical and just amazing hiking. And it's only a couple hours from Ottawa. But like a lot of Canadians, we don't really want to go across the border these days. So I think
understandable, yeah.
The Adirondacks are out of the picture, at least for now. So
I know, it's so painful.
Yeah. Although, I mean, again, I think one of the in the political kind of context, in our current kind of moment, much of my paddling trip, was along the Erie Canal is upstate New York, which is a conservative, Republican, socially, economically challenged part of the country. And so, just because somebody is supporting a particular political candidate or leader doesn't mean you still can't connect with them in one way or another. So it's not the people there, it's the politics and it's the economics that are behind this disconnect. I mean, there's so many critical similarities between Canadians and Americans, wherever you are along this long border. So I hope to get back there soon. But yeah, for now, I think a lot of trips in Ontario and Quebec. I really love the Thousand Islands. Just amazing paddling and camping there. So we actually camped there on the Victoria Day weekend on one of the Thousand Islands National Park. It was cold and wet, but lots of fun. And Algonquin is always a draw. The Muskokas are always a draw. So yeah, nothing huge in the next little while, but I haven't done a lot of paddling yet this spring. So even just getting back on my local rivers and being out in the water will be fun.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, kind of staying local. Like, usually I go out west. My sister lives just outside of Calgary. So I've been, to the mountains a million times, and we'll probably do that next year. But my boyfriend and I are doing a cycling tour called Rideau Lakes in a few weeks, which will, this is airing, probably in the fall, but we'll have done it in June. So to be able to do all these, we're doing the gravel route. So all these, gravel trails I've never been on from Perth to Kingston, I'm really excited about. And then I'm not a kayaker, but I told you, before we hit record, I'm doing a whitewater kayaking camp in Madawaska. I've not spent a lot of time in that area, so I'm very excited. So yeah, we do have might go to the Eastern Townships in Quebec, which is, kind of similar to the Adirondacks. So yeah, we have so much to offer in this area. And anywhere you are in Canada, there is beautiful nature to explore in your own backyard.
Yeah, I mean, even just picking up on that, the Rideau Canal. So the last leg of my trip was Toronto back to Ottawa, and that was in September, and just hit amazing weather window. It was textbook beautiful Ontario fall where the colors were coming out. It was 20 and sunny every day and crisp, cool nights, and I had more warm gear at that leg of my trip, so I was comfortable. And then once I paddled the length of Lake Ontario from Toronto to Kingston and started heading up the Rideau system. I know the Rideau fairly well. I've been in Ottawa for almost 17 years and have paddled and camped and hiked and stayed in towns up and down the route. So I was thinking, okay, it's just, it's my last leg home and it's part that I'm familiar with. We'll just get it done. But I was struck how beautiful it was. And, in the southern part, north of Kingston, you get kind of the rocks of the Frontenac Arch, and it's the Canadian Shield, and then more kind of agricultural and softer landscape once you get up and around and past Smiths Falls. But the Rideau was just really, really beautiful. And the water was just cool and clear, and the swimming was fantastic. So I really loved the Rideau. And you mentioned whitewater. I mean, one of the great things about Ottawa, uniquely great about Ottawa, I think, in addition to the cross-country skiing, is access to whitewater. And you go an hour and a half up from the city to the Cobden area, and just some of those rapids are just really fun. And I'm getting into whitewater paddleboarding. I went up a few times last year with the kayaker neighbor friend and her group, which includes a couple of paddleboarders. And it's challenging and it hurts when you fall from standing on some of those rocks. But
yeah, I bet.
I love the adrenaline of it. I love the camaraderie of going out with a group and spending a few hours on the river. And I like flat water and distance. I love gentle paddling of the roller now and things like that. But when you're on whitewater or surfing standing waves, you're just so focused on the moment, and it's so exhilarating that it's amongst my favorite ways to spend the day on the water in this time of year.
So cool. Dan, Waterborne, a 1,200-mile paddleboarding pilgrimage is out now. Thank you so much for our wonderful conversation today.
Thank you, Marianne. I feel like we could have talked all day, but thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening. For more Let's Take This Outside, go to letstakethisoutside.ca.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.